Janeiro de 2003, um capítulo da história do Brasil.
A capital federal consagra um novo presidente de 170 milhões de cidadãos. O ex-metalúrgico Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva é festejado a caminho do Congresso, onde faz o juramento à Constituição e discursa pela primeira vez como presidente da República.
Hoje é o dia do reencontro do Brasil consigo mesmo.
No Palácio do Planalto, uma cena que o país esperou por 40 anos. Um presidente eleito pelo povo passa a faixa a um sucessor eleito pelo povo. Depois de 8 anos na presidência, Fernando Henrique Cardoso diz que quase chorou de emoção ao passar o cargo a Lula. O Jornal Nacional mostra todos os detalhes da posse, a nomeação oficial do ministério, as autoridades estrangeiras que vieram, os novos nomes da economia e a quarta-feira em que a democracia brasileira foi celebrada numa imensa festa popular na capital.
Veja também, os novos governadores assumem seus cargos em 26 estados e no Distrito Federal. E fogos de artifício iluminam a chegada do Ano Novo em todo o Brasil.
1º de janeiro de 2003.
O Jornal Nacional está começando agora.
Hello. Welcome back to the History of Brazil in English. I am Eric, and it's good to be back. My last video on the history of Brazil in English was probably released around 2023 or 2024, I'm not sure. But anyway, it's been a while since my last video on the history of Brazil, and I'm happy for being able to delve into the history of my beloved country. And this time, we will be addressing the 2 mandates of one of the most popular, if not the most popular, president ever in the history of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who happens to be our current president, by the way. Well, in case you haven't watched my last video on the history of Brazil, actually, there were a couple of videos that I dedicated to doing exercises with you, but the last video on actual content regarding the history of Brazil was about President FHC, Fernando Henrique Cardoso. And it is important to recall that he was a president elected mostly because of his success in dealing with the big monster and problem of Brazil, inflation. And because his solution to inflation was so successful, he was able to guarantee 2 mandates in a row as president of Brazil. The first mandate was very stable, very successful. The second mandate, on the other hand, was not that stable and successful. And it's really important that we try to understand what exactly happened. It's very difficult to talk about this topic, specifically about President Lula, because due to the algorithms of social media, we live in a very, very polarized country. In Brazil, there are many people that hate Lula, and there are also many people that love him. I mean, this kind of scenario has always been around in Brazil, but as I said, because of the algorithms of the social media that select and pick contents that will harmonize with users' inclinations and preferences, people that normally, I mean, not everyone, but most people don't normally like to study, to research, and to try to understand issues um, in an impartial manner, I would say. So, because of this work by the algorithms, these people that tended to be radical, polarized, became even more polarized. And I am aware of that. I am aware that there's going to be there are going to be people that will criticize me, that will hate me, that will not agree with me, but I promise that I'm trying to be that I'm gonna try to be as impartial as possible. Okay. And as I was saying, it is very important that we try to understand now in this different layout, right? If you check my previous videos, I was not showing in my own image here. So this time I prefer to give it, you know, a more modern aspect, to these videos that I'm gonna be producing regarding the history of Brazil from now on. So my question was, why was not FHC so successful in his second mandate? And what was the political scenario in Brazil in the second mandate of FHC? Well, um, the fact is that Lula was a leader of the political party in Brazil called PT, which is clearly a leftist party. Now, if you remember our previous classes on the history of Brazil, you're going to see that not too long ago, we had some really crazy events regarding the communism fear in Brazil. So, once again, the Brazilian people who were relaxed and so confident on FHC were now afraid because everything that Lula for many years said was against neoliberalism. He was clearly leftist. He would often criticize capitalism. And so, um, investors, politicians, entrepreneurs, business people in Brazil were very concerned. Why? Why were they concerned? Because they thought that Lula basically, because of his past with PT, he would go against everything that FHC had achieved in Brazil. They thought that maybe he would not care about regulating inflation, keeping it under control. Um, they thought that maybe Lula would not really continue the good work that FHC had been doing since his first mandate. Now, as I said, all these people, investors, politicians, governors, business people in general, they were really afraid that what FHC had built, that was inflation targeting, fiscal discipline, financial credibility, they were afraid that Lula would not uh, care about that anymore, you know? But although they felt that PT and Lula might default on that, might abandon inflation control, break contracts, what turned out happening was totally the opposite. And because of that fear, by the end of 2002, when FHC was at the end of his mandate as his second mandate as president of Brazil, So the whole Brazilian market was messed up. And realizing that um, Lula and PT addressed the nation, guaranteeing, ensuring the people and everyone in Brazil that Lula would keep fiscal surpluses, that he wouldn't destroy the Brazilian economy, that he would keep stabilization as his priority, that he would keep controlling inflation, that he would preserve investors' confidence, and that he would keep the currency stable, which is a very important thing. After all, FHC had been elected because of his success regarding the Brazilian currency, right? So once PT and Lula decided to address this nation in this manner, everything calmed down. Everything calmed down. And it's really cool because I clearly remember these days, you know, and um, no one can argue against the fact that, especially the first Lula mandate, was marked by prosperity in every possible way. And now we're going to be understanding why. But before that, I would like to ask you a question. And this is something that many people here against Lula in Brazil um, use to criticize him. Um, why? First question, why did Lula change his mind? Why did Lula um, was not faithful to all that criticism that he used to have regarding capitalism? Why suddenly, out of nowhere, from day to night, he started to governing as a capitalist president? And that's the reason why radical leftists in Brazil, radical communists and socialists in Brazil hate Lula. Because Lula, this is a philosophical point, and we got to spend some time here thinking about that. The fact is that Lula realized in the beginning, before 2002, PT and Lula thought of power was in the Congress, in voting, in social mobilization. But when all this mess in Brazil began to take place around 2002, Lula realized that if he didn't change his speech, he would be in hot water. His currency would collapse. His interest rate would explode, would burst. His state would go bankrupt, and his government would die, even before he was able to implement all the changes and humanitarian improvements that he wished to implement in the country. So PT and Lula were forced by reality. PT came from these anti-IMF history and tradition, anti-privatization, anti-market. This is what they were. But Lula realized that he needed to govern. So he decided to come up with something different. He decided to come up with a strong, redistributive state, namely capitalist state. So he kept the inflation goals. He kept the superávit. I'm going to tell you later on what it means. And he kept faithful to the financial market. And not only that, but he used all of that to finance social policies, to create an internal market, and to reduce poverty. To reduce poverty, which was a milestone of his two mandates, right? So, as Lula we saw in the video Lula, right, being elected, the whole inauguration. You're seeing the picture, right, um, in which Fernando Henrique Cardoso is basically passing the baton to Lula, and you also have the first ladies in the photo, and some people regarding the uh, you know all the government at the time. So once Lula um, ensured everyone that he would continue the good work that FHC had been doing and that he would go even further than FHC, everything went back to track. Okay. This decision that he took was absolutely, absolutely decisive. So basically, what changed it? And that is also stuff that people most of the time say here in Brazil against Lula. Or what Lula did basically was use the good foundation, the good framework that FHC established, and he soaked all of that until that vanished away. That is partially true. Why partially? Because um, what we had basically is Lula kept the macroeconomic orthodox policy in Brazil, which means that he kept the inflation goals, high interest rates when necessary, and a fiscal superavit. Fiscal superavit, basically, guys, is about you getting more money than what you spend. Remember that Brazil used to have an external debt, right? And Lula was faithful to his promise that he would combat this external debt. And not only did he do so, but also he paid this external debt, which is something unprecedented in Brazil, right? Um, but Lula went beyond that. And what did Lula do? I don't know if you're receiving these messages here, but anyways, uh, because there are people calling me here via WhatsApp, so I'm sorry if you're hearing this bounce from WhatsApp, but we'll keep going anyway. I forgot to shut down WhatsApp. So, anyways, what Lula basically did is that Lula united, the this pragmatic social democrat government, you know, uh, remaining faithful to the macroeconomic orthodox scheme, as I said. But he went further. He understood that the state can redistribute. But first, you need to produce, to bring about, you need to collect, and you need to stabilize. So he united these orthodox macroeconomics with social justice. And this is something that I want to talk to you about. Okay? Um, well, for example, Bolsa Familia, which could well be translated into English as um, family coupon or family voucher. What is that exactly? Well, this is basically a synthesis, a set of social programs. Some of them even exist before Lula. But what Lula really did that was differentiated here was the fact that he combined all of these programs in a way that would actually work and benefit not only the poor, but the entire country. So many people say, and basically, what is the Bolsa Familia about? For example, well, basically, this program would offer not a salary, not wages, but it would offer a minimum amount of money for these poor people that had difficulty trying to find a job to survive. And and there were conditions, in order to keep receiving this money, uh, you should be integrated to education and healthcare, which means that, for example, and this is something that works still nowadays, if you are encompassed by the Bolsa Familia program and you have children, for example, you gotta make sure and demonstrate that you're taking your children to the public school. And there are many other conditions. So the idea here was to reduce inequality and poverty, and at the same time provide the people with minimum income so that they could participate in the market. And that is unprecedented, because although we did have assistentialist programs at the FHC mandates, they didn't work together. They didn't really help the people, right? So, man, everybody started calling me now. So I'm really sorry about this, these messages if you're hearing them. But anyways, as I was saying, you see, these programs now at the Lula mandates, they were working in coordination, and they caused the poor to be able to enter the market and to spend money in the market. And in doing so, they moved the market, and they caused Brazil to prosper. There are many people that say here in Brazil, oh, the mid class pays for Bolsa Familia. Yeah, but this is not a problem of Lula. The thing is that Brazil has a tax system that is highly regressive. So poor pay a lot via taxes on consumption. The mid class pays a lot via income tax and indirect taxes. And the rich pay proportionally less. But this is not something that Lula created, that Lula brought about. This is something that existed before Lula and that Lula did not resolve. And this is not resolved yet. Right now, Lula is working on income tax, but it is not easy to change the scenario because historically it's really strong in Brazil, right? So, although the mid class is one of the main financiers, one of the main net financiers of the state, it has also benefited from it, because right now, and I clearly remember that time, there was, crime rates were low, uh, the consuming market was larger, there was more political stability, and the economy was less uh, changing, volatile, right? So, this is basically what I can tell you, about Bolsa Familia. So remember, keep in mind that the actual incentive by the Bolsa Familia program is, um, okay, you will have some income, but you're not supposed to remain your whole life just surviving on this income by Bolsa Familia. This is something that you will be receiving so that you can have a chance to survive and to improve your quality of life a long time. And data, let me show you here, this timeline here. So this is just a simplified milestone view. Okay, so we have here the inauguration of his first mandate and Fome Zero, Zero Hunger, the Zero Hunger program. Okay, so in 2003, sorry, we had inauguration. We had the reaffirmation of inflation targeting and fiscal responsibility, as I said, and we had the launch of Fome Zero, the first real program by the Lula first mandate government, right? In the next year, let's watch this video on zero hunger, on the zero hunger program. Let me let me find it here. Just a minute. Just a minute. I think you can probably listen to that, but you're not seeing anything, but you're gonna see it now. Okay, let's go.
Todo mundo tem direito de plantar, todo mundo tem direito de colher, todo mundo tem direito de ganhar, pra todo mundo ter direito de comer. Todo mundo tem direito de ensinar, todo mundo tem direito de aprender, todo mundo tem direito a trabalhar, pra todo mundo ter direito de comer. Todo mundo tem direito de doar, todo mundo tem direito a receber. Todo mundo tem direito de somar, pra todo mundo ter direito de comer.
Fome Zero. Está começando o maior e mais completo programa contra a fome já feito em nosso país.
Todo mundo tem direito de ajudar, pra todo mundo ter direito de comer.
O desafio de acabar com a fome no Brasil é enorme. E já estava mais do que na hora da gente entrar nessa guerra. Essa sim é uma guerra que vale a pena.
Todo mundo tem direito de ajudar, pra todo mundo ter direito de comer.
Ligue 0800 707 2003 e participe. Fome Zero. O Brasil que come, ajudando o Brasil que tem fome.
Okay, let's go back here to my file. Great. Okay, so this is the political propaganda at the time, basically fostering all these social programs that the government was interested in. And as I said, Fome Zero, or the Zero Hunger program, was the first one by the government, right? But then we had in the following year, we had Bolsa Familia. And that, Bolsa Familia was established in the federal law, right? And we have here the numbers. Let me show you here. So we have the context at the start of 2003. We've already discussed that. Macroeconomic management. So you have here, let me try to minimize it a little bit. Okay. Yes. As you can see here, reserves exceeded external debt, which means that clearly the government was making more money, was having more income than paying stuff, than paying debts, which was a good thing. And at the end of the day, it ended up resolving the problem of the external debt, which is something amazing that this government was able to accomplish, right? So we have the social policy, hunger reduction, right? As I said, the first program, the first social program was Zero Hunger. Then we had Bolsa Familia. I told you a little bit about it. I told you a little bit about it, sorry. I told you a little bit about it. And basically, it targeted poor households with cash transfers coupled to education and health conditionalities and centralized the registry management of beneficiaries. So it was not the government giving money to people, giving money away. No, the target here was to help people, to help poor households with this minimum income, and under the condition that they would be coupled to education and health conditions and conditionalities. And what was the target? To enable these poor households to enter the market, which is something that FHC never managed to do. In fact, indeed, right? So as you can see here in this table, distributional outcomes, right? There's a broad evidence here that there was a decline in inequality and a falling of poverty in Brazil. You see the line here? So it is unquestionable that that kind of thing happened. So no one can argue against that, right? And right after these social programs, because the external scenario, the foreign scenario was very positive at the time. I mean, from 2003 to 2006 until 2008, actually, we had a very, very upbeat, optimistic international scenario. So we had the Growth Acceleration Program that became the flagship infrastructure framework, right? So in Brazil, we had biofuels, ethanol, right? And also, something that really helped the government at the time was the pre-salt program. So Brazil, because of the pre-salt, was able to take the lead in terms of not only commodities, but in terms of petroleum. Yes. So Petrobras was a company that was really benefited because of all of this. So as a consequence, Lula easily remained as president of Brazil in his second mandate from 2006 to 2010, in spite of, and that's a very negative aspect of his mandate, even the first one, in spite of mensalão. Mensalão was because the problem that PT had, not only PT, but anyone that decides to govern in Brazil, is that we have a very fragmented political scenario in Brazil. There are many political parties, and a president, the executive power, needs the legislative power and the judiciary power as well to govern, right? So, because of that, there were reports of corruption inside the Congress because they were selling votes. And that was a very negative of the first mandate of Lula, right? Corruption, corruption everywhere. In spite of that, Lula had such a positive first mandate that he managed to remain as president of Brazil from 2006 to 2010. So his positioning didn't change. And one thing that is very important, Lula was a master at the international diplomacy. You know, during the two mandates, Lula emphasized autonomy, diversification of partners. So Brazil was no longer subject to the US as it used to be in the past. Now Brazil was searching for new partners, allies all over the world, right? So common themes in this time include South-South cooperation, Mercosul, right, or Mercosouth, as you wish, greater engagement with Africa and the Middle East, intensified regional integration initiatives, and a stronger role in multilateral arenas, right? And this is something that President Lula used against Bolsonaro in his in this new mandate because Bolsonaro did not have the same, although it was a very different context because we had COVID, we had a lot of stuff in the first Bolsonaro mandate, actually in the Bolsonaro mandate, right? And but Lula accused Bolsonaro of not being intelligent, smart, as Lula was concerning international diplomacy. So this is basically what Lula did, right? And the problem is that everything was going well until 2008. In 2008, we had international crisis, right? I guess you remember. Oops, sorry about that. I guess you probably remember what happened in Spain around 2008, 2009, the real estate crisis. So everyone, or I mean, everyone suffered in Spain, in a lot of places at the time, and Brazil suffered because of that. Luckily, we had reserves here in Brazil. So we didn't really feel all the mess that was going on around the world at the time. But even so, and combined to corruption crisis again, this time characterized by corruption cases in Petrobras. And believe me, it was dirty. It was really dirty. Billions of reais, billions of dollars in sheer corruption. But even so, um, his popularity, Lula's popularity, didn't shrink. And Lula was able to elect his successor, Dilma, as president of Brazil, right? And now, in our next class, we're going to see how Dilma governed Brazil, or did not govern Brazil. The fact is, it is very important that you understand uh, FHC structured the country. Lula kept the structure and revitalized the country and even went further with, in a very intelligent way, in a very clever way, with social programs and other measures that improved the political scenario and the economic scenario in Brazil as well. Now, the problem with Lula is that all the system that he created required an external, an international market that was always in conditions, in good conditions to make it prosper. And since we had the international crisis around 2008, problems began to emerge. And that is going to certainly impact the following years in Brazil, including Dilma's mandate. So I hope you have enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in our next video on the history of Brazil. Thank you. See you.